Morning, I'm Dustin Czarny, Democratic Elections Commissioner for Onondaga County, and welcome to Zoom with Czarny. This is my interview show, and I'm so happy. It's kind of a special Zoom with Czarny today because I have an old friend, former Onondaga County Court Judge Steve Dougherty. He was a former Onondaga County Court Judge and City Court Judge, and a prosecutor, and actually is back to work at the DA's office part-time. And I had him on because I wanted to have somebody local talk about the Trump indictments, and specifically the January 6 indictments that were dropped last week. We go into the strength of the case, the how the federal court system works, and though he was never a federal prosecutor or judge, he did have some background in that, and I thought it would be helpful for those that want to listen in to hear a former judge and a prosecutor's perspective on these indictments. And one of the reasons that I do focus on these indictments as opposed to the Mar-a-Lago indictments are because this is directly related to elections. What's being alleged here is he tried to subvert the will of the people by interfering with the election and the counting of the electoral votes. So stay tuned for this interview. I'm very happy to bring it to you. You may see on my channel, I've been doing a lot about the machine replacement at Onondaga County Board of Elections. We had a press conference yesterday that's on my social feeds, and also up at dustinczarny.com. And next week, we're bringing in new machines. All the new machines are coming in. We had a big press conference yesterday demonstrating it. So check it out. And I hope that maybe you can even come down to the office and test it before this election, because they are coming in for this election. We're really happy to have that. And that's really what the entire month of August is about. It's getting ready for this big changeover. So stay tuned, especially on my Instagram and Facebook. I'll be doing reels. And next week, I will be in Niagara Falls for our annual summer conference. So for the New York State Elections Commissioner Association. So I'll do some reels from there as well. But right now, stay tuned for Zoom with Czarny with Judge Steve Dougherty. And we're back, and I'm so happy to have my good friend Judge Steve Dougherty, retired. He's a former county court judge and a former prosecutor and a former city court judge, but also I felt it was nice that I know him. He has never been on our program before, but when the Trump indictments dropped yesterday in the DC case, or last week in the DC case, I really wanted to have somebody on to kind of talk about this, since the DC case is an elections case. So Judge Dougherty, thank you so much for coming on Zoom with Czarny.
Oh, Dustin, it's my pleasure. We go back over 20 years, and for the last 20 years, I couldn't come on because I was an elected official and a judge. And now that I've retired, I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, and I just to put it out there, when I texted you and I said, hey, can you do this? You're like, which one are we talking about? Because there's been so many cases. So for the audience to know, we're talking about the insurrection indictments from January 6th that were filed in DC court under Judge Shulkin last week, by Liverpool own Jack Smith, the special counsel. We're not talking about the Georgia case. We're not talking about that might come up. We're not talking about the documents case, and we're not talking about the Alvin Bragg's porn star hush money case. Those cases are still ongoing. But because this has directly to do with election, I wanted to talk about it. But before we get too much into the case, Judge, why don't you tell people a little bit about your background?
All right. Well, thanks, Dustin. I grew up here in Syracuse, one of eight. I'm not going to go through my whole biography, but it's interesting because my dad was a lawyer. My sister, who runs the assigned counsel program, also is a lawyer, and got out of law school. I interned at a DA's office in Albany. I went to Albany Law School, got out of law school, realized I wanted to be a prosecutor. Did that for 3 years over in Albany. My wife, Mary, who's from Syracuse, also Nottingham grad. We came back here. I worked for the Onondaga County DA's office for 11 years. I prosecuted homicides for 10 of those years. After that, it was time for something new. I ran for city court judge with a lot of your help, Dustin, not knowing anything about running for an elected position. I was elected, and I became the supervising judge in city court over time. I started our domestic violence court, our adolescent diversion court, our animal cruelty court, and then ran for county court, ran for re-election city court unopposed. I ran for county court in 2016, the same year that Donald Trump was elected president, and then retired after that with 33 plus years in the system. And now I'm actually consulting with our local DA's office, trying to help with the young attorneys feel their way around. So it's a long career, and I loved every minute of it.
So you're back with the DA's office consulting. It's kind of back to the beginning of your roots. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on this program, because of your experience as a criminal judge and also as prosecutor. We can talk generally about the case. I'm going to put out there at the beginning, you were never a judge on the federal bench or worked in the federal court. So there are some things that are obviously very different, but there are some things that are kind of the same with this, right?
That's correct. And I am admitted in federal court. For a time when I was in the district attorney's office, I was cross-designated as a special assistant U.S. attorney, basically with gun cases in Onondaga County. And many of my friends, including one of my closest friends, Glenn Sotheby, who's our supervising judge in federal court. But if we get to a question about some specific, and I don't know the answer, I'll let you know.
Well, if you don't know the answer, I'm probably not going to ask that question, because I'm definitely not an attorney. And though I know a little bit about election law, this is a little bit out of my field too. But I do feel like there's a lot of people like that. So this kind of conversation, I think, can inform people. So let's talk about the indictment itself. Obviously, this is an indictment that came about after the congressional special hearings, that the insurrection hearings that were done in the Congress, and then that evidence was turned over to the Department of Justice, and Attorney General Merrick Garland appointed a special counsel, Jack Smith, who again from Liverpool, and then Jack Smith was working two different cases, the documents cases and the January 6th case, or at least that's all we know of right now.
Right.
There could be others, but this indictment was dropped last week. So, Judge, what you've probably read the indictment, you've probably read some of the commentary about it. What is your top line feel about this indictment, or about a federal indictment in itself?
Well, I'll tell you, Dustin. I mean, it's incredible. We are in uncharted waters. We have the former president of the United States who's facing 3 and very soon, most likely 4 indictments. And just that alone, if you just stop and think about that alone, Nixon got close. And it didn't happen. But it's as we sit here and think about what's happening, it's incredible. It's incredible to me as a former jurist and prosecutor that this is happening in the United States of America. But when you look at the indictment itself, as you were mentioning, we have 4 main counts. It's the conspiracy to defraud the United States. We have witness tampering. We have conspiracy against the rights of citizens. And then we have an obstruction charge. And if convicted, and again, there's federal sentencing guidelines that control, but you're talking about a sentence of potentially, which is incredible. We're talking about up to 20 years just on one of the counts alone. So we have to step back and take it all in. But in this instance, and in any instance in our country, Mr. Trump is a private citizen and should be treated as such. And it's easy for me to say that because we all know that's not going to happen, but that's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, and again, the indictments themselves were about the actions in and around the January 6th, casting the votes of the electors in Congress, not just the riots that happened on the grounds. And in fact, incitement to riot is not one of the indictments that's
right.
But what is in there is the fake elector scheme and the conspiracy charges, where he had 6 unindicted so far co-conspirators Many of them seem to be former lawyers, or
Yeah. Oh, no doubt.
Giuliani, John Eastman are rumored in there. So can you explain why this would be a crime? What is outlined in the indictment? Why, the Trump team seems to say, well, this is just free speech, and we're indicting free speech. But does it go beyond that? Is that a legitimate defense?
Well, I boil it down to this: and these are allegations, and never forget these are allegations. But it's an alleged effort to overturn a legitimate election result, which across the board, except for a very small, and I think smaller minority by day, would dispute that. But alleged efforts to overturn a legitimate election result and obstruct the peaceful transfer of power. I mean, when you're talking, this isn't some regime in the middle of Central America. This is the United States of America, where we set the ground rules on how a democracy is run. And these are efforts to spread false claims about the election itself, while knowing, remember, this is the key, while knowing them to be untrue. All right, that's what the defense is going to be. And if you ask me, the defense is going to be, he never believed them to be untrue. He believed that it was a false election and that he won. That's what the prosecution has to prove, and that he knew them to be untrue. Then you have the effort to discount thousands of legitimate votes in trying to disrupt the certification of the electoral vote, which obviously led to the insurrection.
Yeah, that's an important point about the belief, because that is another thing that is going to come out, is that he's going to say he was taking the advice of counsel, or many different one of these counsels. I'm sure he'll be throwing these people right under the bus. There's a bus parked out front for him to do that with. But how far can you take that type of defense? Obviously, I'm sure other people appeared before you, and they believed what they were, in a financial fraud case or something else, they believed what they were doing was right, but it turned out to be wrong. How far of a belief, how much do you have to suspend your disbelief of a belief defense? What is a jury going to be charged with here?
Well, what's interesting, and I haven't read the charges. I used to give the charges. Every single trial we ever had, I gave the charge, and it's very difficult because I know if I'm the average citizen, I'm listening to a jury charge. About 10 minutes in, you've already lost me. You know what I mean? I've already lost them. But in this instance, it's who are the witnesses going to be? Okay, we have six unnamed co-conspirators. How many of them are going to be testifying? Okay, we don't know the answers to that question. We don't know if the Department of Justice has three of these folks ready to testify. And with private conversations, we know that Vice President Pence, took copious notes of his conversations. Okay, so we know. I mean, can you imagine the former Vice President of the United States, testifying in this trial against his former president? I mean, can you imagine that? But that's what I can see. You have to have proof that at the time that Donald Trump knew that the false claims were untrue. You have to prove that. How do you prove it? It can't just be, well, we all knew it. Okay, that's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. You have to prove that he knew them to be untrue, and that's got to be the people around him. And we already know, they've gone on record, there's a lot of people in his administration telling him, over and over and over. And a lot of people used to tell him a lot of things, and he went the other way. We know that.
Right, and that's the Mike Pence issue is another wrinkle, and we'll get to the possible protective order because of that over the last few days in a little bit. But it does look like Mike Pence is a material witness and will have to probably testify against Donald Trump. There are rumors that Mark Meadows is a material witness, and there's a reason why he wasn't indicted.
Right.
There's obviously, some of these six, one of the theories out there of why they didn't name the co-conspirators is because they're trying to get them to flip, and giving them, as much runway to do so as possible.
Right. And I also think that they wanted to get this indictment filed just against former President Trump to get the thing moving along. Okay, if you throw in 6 co-conspirators, for example, we indict all 6. That really gums up the work and can slow things down. Things move in the federal system often much faster than they do in the state system, but it's just because of the volume of cases. Their volume of cases is so much smaller. It's so much smaller that they can move a case. You walk into court and you get a scheduling guideline. You get a guideline right then. This is when the discovery is done. This is when the hearing's going to be done, and this is when we're setting trial. And most judges don't divert from that. It doesn't matter who the defendant is.
We're waiting for August 28th. That's the hearing date that the Judge Chilkin, who I have to put out there, was confirmed 97-0. So
Yep.
Some of the people that are going to start throwing shade voted to confirm her, to this federal court, and has had a stellar record, and also has a history with Donald Trump about his executive privilege claims. So some of this, so do you believe that this is something that we could see a trial on before the presidential election next year?
Oh, I think that's going to be the goal. I think that will be the goal. The discovery's all turned over. Everything's there. The judges there expect the attorneys to do their job, and these attorneys will do their job, and they'll seek to delay. But I think this judge will fully intend to have this case tried before the elections.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, Alvin Bragg has been on record saying that he would demur to this, any federal because he has a March trial date, and
Right.
he moved the Eileen Cannon's, the document cases in May, but many people already believe there was some action on that today that
Right.
start moving that later on. But this one could fit into that spring March window pretty easily. As we're looking at this, and as we're starting, obviously our former president is addicted to his Truth Social, and he has now, in the wake of this indictment, after being told in court, and he agreed that he would not be intimidating witnesses, not be trying to intimidate anybody to do with the case. Over the weekend, and late last week, a series of statements, both in his in one of his rallies and on his Truth Social, saying the judges needs to be removed, moving it out of DC to West Virginia, saying he can't get a fair trial. He took on Mike Pence by name, took on Jack Smith by name, took on Judge Chilkin by name in a series of things. And up until today, again, we're taping this on Monday, the Department of Justice quickly, I think over the weekend, had a proposed protective order. And can you kind of explain what a protective order is, and why would the prosecution move on this?
Well, I'll go back very quickly to judges give warnings all the time to defendants on how you're going to comport yourself, especially if you're out of custody between now and the time of the trial, because there's certain things that can't happen. In this case, knowing former President Trump's background and the way he likes to put his thoughts out there constantly, they really gave specific warnings, and basically was, don't do anything to intimidate or try to influence any of the witnesses. That was one of the main warnings. And now the Department of Justice sees what he was just putting out there as a violation of those orders. So now you get the order from the court. And I will tell you, Dustin, from personal experience and from being involved in the criminal justice system, judges take these warnings and their words very seriously. They don't care who the defendant is. If I tell some defendant, this is the way you're going to comport yourself, and they fail to do so, it very often ends up with that person in custody. Okay, because I've told you, and there'll be more than, it won't just be automatic. There's a warning. Okay, I told you, you agreed, you're not doing it. I'm going to tell you again, if you violate my order, this is what's going to happen. You're going to be taken into custody. You have no access to, social media, et cetera, et cetera. Could I see that happening here? It'd be very hard to see. It'd be very difficult to see President Trump being taken into custody prior to the trial. But I could see him being barred from social media. I could see that happening as part of the protective order.
Which is,
and so you asked me, and I apologize. You asked me what's protective order, and it's just that. It's saying normally what we do is a protective order is you can't here. You're going to sign. This is what I'm ordering you. You can't contact witnesses. You can't read certain reports because we're worried about everyone's safety. That's what that comes down to. But it can also be the way the allegations here are the intimidation of potential witnesses. You're going to have to stop statements, and it's going to be very difficult to do. We do have freedom of speech in the country, but we also have a legal system. He's in jeopardy, and he has to comport himself in a certain way, or the court will take action.
Yeah, I guess that's going to be the trick here, because he is running for president, and I mean, whether you and I support him or whoever, doesn't matter. He is a candidate for president. He's the leading candidate for the Republican nomination, and if you believe some of the polls, a strong possibility of being the next president of the United States. Unless there's a change here, but not strong possibility. I guess even it's
sure.
A possibility. But how much can a judge take those type of factors into account? I mean, obviously, other defendants, no one has been a president of the United States, but other defendants are celebrities, they're public figures. Part of their job is being on social media. And, obviously, some of the things he's saying, his response to the protective order today was all 1A, First Amendment. He has a right to say all this stuff. And can a judge give a protective order saying you cannot discuss this case publicly, and if you violate it, you give up your freedom?
Well, absolutely, but it's not just discussing the case. The order was you can't do anything to try to intimidate a witness. And what the allegation is from the Department of Justice is saying, if you go after me, I'm going to come after you. What is that? I mean, I don't know. Again, the facts of the case are in front of the judge and not in front of me, and Judge Hogan will do her job. But what does that mean? I mean, how could you read it some other way? All right. So a judge, basically, it's a balancing act. But if the judge finds that there's violations of her order, she's going to act appropriately, and they can appeal whatever whatever. But judges really give a lot of deference to judges when it's something of this nature, higher courts.
So, obviously we're going to go into discovery here, pretrial motions, witness lists, all of that. And of course there could be superseding indictments. We saw that with the Mar-a-Lago case. That all of this stuff could happen. And of course, we got Georgia and the other case as well. When, if, we don't know the strength of the case, we don't know the witnesses, we don't know the evidence that is going to be brought to bear. But in the case of a conviction, what is a defendant's rights to appeal that? And can they stay out of jail to appeal that? Because, some of the theories out there is that he's just trying to get to November 7th or November 6th of next year. So if he gets elected, he can, replace the Department of Justice and drop all the charges or whatever. So how much time after a conviction would an appeal usually get?
Well, it's interesting because, we are going pretty far down the road. Okay. We're assuming a lot, but should the trial happen next spring, should there be a conviction, then you got to wait till sentencing. The one thing that I've seen, the federal court does much slower than we do, is the time between the end of the trial and sentencing. They gather a lot more information. They gather everything they can, and so that can be a few months. In our case, it's normally no more than 2 months if the person's out of custody, no more than a few weeks if the person's in custody. They take a lot longer. So let's say this all happens in a timely fashion and the sentencing is in June of next year. Okay. You can file a direct appeal immediately, and you can certainly file appeal to a higher court if he was sentenced, if he's convicted, and if he's sentenced to incarceration. You can file immediately to a higher court to have him out pending appeal. And that's often granted, often, especially in the federal system, depending, it all depends. If these aren't, we say they're not acts of violence, but you have the insurrection. Okay. And it's so unique, Dustin. I hate to even predict. It's so unique. It is so unique because on one hand, if there's conviction, you have, the charges are the charges, and let's say there's a sentence of incarceration, but you also have the former president of the United States, and whoever's making those decisions after the sentencing, I don't envy them at all.
Yeah, it is an undiscovered country. We've never been here before. We've never, it's not something that I don't think we ever want to be here again.
Exactly.
But and here you have someone who seems to have had an ability to create a violent reaction from a mob, and how much is that going to factor in to the court's actions pre-trial and post-trial?
Yeah, well, I think what went a long way towards, and you mentioned it earlier, towards the Department of Justice action in this case, were the January 6th hearings, because they really did a fantastic job, no matter which side you're looking at it from, a fantastic job in gathering evidence and getting witnesses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So, but when it comes down to it, the judge has to make the determination. But don't forget, one of the charges is the attempt to block certification. Okay, that's one of the charges. So if I'm thinking about that as a judge, how does the proof of the insurrection not come in? Not that he's charged with, as you said, riling up the mob himself and trying to overthrow the government of the United States, but he is charged with an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding, that being blocking the certification of the electoral vote. And I mean, that's Mike Pence, right? Besides, all the others that called for help that day.
Yeah, we don't know how many witnesses they plan to bring.
Right.
We know that they've been interviewing a ton of people. We don't know.
Yeah.
They didn't have to put that into the indictment of who they're going to bring. They're just, all it is a speaking indictment that gives the allegations of the charges.
Yeah.
We don't know the case at this point.
But and the thing is, people that speak on the indictment, no one should speak about the indictment unless they've read it. They really shouldn't, and no one should be speaking about it unless they've read it. And it reads, most indictments don't read that way. I mean, it's laid out. That indictment's laid out. The Mar-a-Lago one is laid out. I mean, they're just laid out. So there it is. You know what their allegations are. It's just a question of who's going to testify.
And one last thing, and we're kind of getting towards the end of this, and I'm sure I'll have you on again because this has been great. And I'm sure that we're going to be talking about this as over the next year or so, because we're going to see this continue to unfold. But
sure,
one of the other charges out there is that why did it take so long? Why did it take so long to get to here? I saw, of course, there's always some, slip of the tongue that is kind of humorous, but one of the attorneys said, well, Jack Smith has had 3.5 years to prosecute this. We should get 3.5 years to defend it. Well, 3.5 years is before January 6th, about a year before January 6th. We've actually only been 2.5 years. But considering maybe he couldn't get the math right. But still, is that ever a consideration that the government had so much time to put it together? And it's 2.5 years from a time of a conspiracy, a long time to wait to bring a prosecution?
When you're talking about the federal, I'll tell you, this isn't a shots fired on Salina, in Jefferson, where there's 3 witnesses and the guy saw somebody shoot somebody. That would be indicted next week. It'll be indicted next week. You think about how voluminous this case is. We have had over 1,000 people charged in relation to January 6th, 1,000. All right. So no, 2.5 years is not. And when you're talking about a case of this magnitude, are you going to rush this? I mean, if you're Mr. Smith, you're going to take the time you need to make sure it gets done right. And the one thing I just want to say, and it's off topic, but the one thing as a judge that I always put first and foremost is there's only one person's rights in the Constitution that are protected. And they're not the government's, and they're not the attorney general's, They're the accused, okay, the accused. And no matter what side you fall on politically or how you feel about this thing, that's what the judge has to take into account, no matter how anybody feels, is that it's the accused rights that are protected in the Constitution. And we all have to remember that. No matter who that person is, it doesn't matter who the person is.
That's right. I mean, he is absolutely 100% innocent till proven guilty by a jury of his peers. Oh, you know what? I said one last thing, but this just reminded me of the thing.
Yeah.
The attempt to move the venue from DC to West Virginia, because, you know, the crime took place in DC, but let's go try it in West Virginia, which they said West Virginia was a more diverse population, which I'm trying to understand what the definition is of diversity. But
what was interesting about it, and I'll let you get to your question, is I thought they would at least pick Virginia, which is contiguous.
They could have done the northern part of Virginia, which has been done before. But
Maryland, Virginia. But when they said West Virginia, I thought it was a mistake.
Yeah.
But as far as moving it, it's really that you have a huge burden to move a case. It's a huge burden. We've had homicides here in Onondaga County, which, for example, just people can relate to Dr. Newlander's case, okay? And they thought, oh, we can't get a fair jury. And they asked to move that to a different county. During jury selection, I was very familiar with the case because Judge Miller was doing it. I was in the next chambers. You can't imagine the number of jurors that said, we don't know anything about this. We don't know who Dr. Newlander is, because we all think that people do. Obviously, this is different. This is the former president of the United States. But do you think you can get a fair and impartial jury out of the District of Columbia? Of course you can. It can take more time, but of course you can.
Yeah, and it's not like the jury doesn't have to know about this. I mean, in a case like this, you're going to have a large part of the population that knows about this. But
they know that something happened.
Can they be fair is the question, right?
That's the bottom line, is can you be fair? And again, it'll take more time, but it would take more time in West Virginia. It would take more time in Hawaii, and it'd take more time in Oregon.
Yeah, a case moved to Hawaii might be a little bit expensive for the federal government. But so, Judge, thank you so much for coming on,
my pleasure.
and also thank you for your career and continuing to serve our community. I really appreciate that. Thank you for being a friend. And I always like to end the Zooms with, what haven't we talked about? What is something that we haven't got to that you want to get out there right now?
Well, I think, to your credit, you pretty much covered the notes that I had that I wanted to make sure to hit. Again, I go back to the fact that this has never happened, and no one's ever wanted to see anything like this happen. When we were going through the Nixon thing, I was a little kid, and my father, we watched it every single night. That we watch the Watergate hearings every night. Now, no one wants to see it happen. But the way we need to go through this is with the administration of justice. We don't need riots in the street from either side. We don't need people prejudging the case. We need it to go through we need to uphold democracy in our system of government, in our system of jurisdiction, and go through the case. Mr. Trump's rights are protected. The government does their job, or they don't. And he's convicted, or he's not. And that's the way it should go through. And we both know that's probably not going to happen, which is sad and unfortunate.
Yeah, I think we do have a long period to go through in this country over the next 18 months. But hopefully, the will of good people will hold us together. That's what held us together after January 6th. It's what's held us together for 4 years before that. It is something that I have faith in our system of governance, and I think we will get through it. It might be hell, but we're going to get through it.
But I agree with you, and I do have faith in it too. And it's been challenged. It's been challenged in recent years, but here we are. Now we put it to the ultimate challenge. So let's see.
Yeah. Well, Judge, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll have you back as soon as we see some more. Probably sometime next year when we get some trial dates.
Sounds good, Dustin. Thanks a lot for having me. I appreciate it.
And that was my interview with Judge Steve Dougherty, retired judge. He's that was one of my, I found one of the most enjoyable times I've had doing this program. So I hope you enjoyed it as well. Next week, as I said in the beginning, I will be at the NYSECA Summer Conference. So I will not be doing a Zoom with Zarni, although I will do some reels from the NICEC Economic Summer Conference, as I like to do when I'm away on business. And that's what this is, because all of our training is done at these conferences, and it's in working with vendors. We're also getting in our clear ballot system next week. The staff at the Board of Elections is taking those in, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. I will do a Zoom with Zarni with Patrona Jones. She is a candidate for Common Council 4th District. And this weekend, I'll be doing a Zoom with Zarni, or I'm sorry, a weekly wonk with on the town of Onondaga. So check that out. Sorry. Sorry, got a little dry throat today, but so check that out. And I hope to see you. You can go to dustinzarni.com and subscribe for all the election news and content updates. And they're going to be starting to come pretty heavy now that we're getting right into the general election. Take care. Bye-bye.